Wagler series this morning. We have been in this for the last 4 weeks, and it's a series where we focus on relationships because our joy is dependent upon them to be healthy. And we have tried each week to give you a lot of practical ways to work this out in your life. And today we're talking about joyful celebration. So the main question today is your heart ready to party? So that's what I want you to kind of filter everything through. I wanted to start off by sharing one of my favorite memories from this past year of where the joyful celebration was just such a pure thing that will stick with me forever. So John and I had the opportunity to go to Kenya last summer with an organization called Compassion International, and they're a partner that we work with. They do amazing work all over the world, and so we traveled for like a day and a half or so to get there, and we had just met all of our team that we were going to be working with, and so there were like 30 of us. None of us knew each other before going, and we were just tired. Everything was new. It was a different language, different country, different culture. Everything was different. So we were starting our first official day there. We were going to go to one of the compassion centers to find out about what they do. And this is a center where it was in the middle of Nairobi, and they brought in moms, like single moms, young moms, to teach them about nutrition, with job skills, start new businesses, all of this great stuff. And so we're in these vans, and we're going on these dusty kind of roads, and we pull up to the gate. And when the gates to this church where the center is opened, the singing started. And it was the most beautiful sound I had maybe ever heard. I look out the window, and there are these moms lined up that are wearing their babies. They had put on their very best for us, and their outfits were brightly colored, and they had giant smiles on their faces, and they were singing so loud and so powerfully and so rhythmically. And so our vans parked, and they danced on up to the vans, opened the door, and one by one escorted each of us out, hand in hand, dancing and jumping and singing. And so we all ended up, all of these strangers from America and strangers from Kenya, ended up singing and jumping and dancing together and just laughing. And I will never forget that moment because we were all so fully present. It was a moment of such fullness and such joy. They had prepared for us to come. They treated us with such honor and respect and love. And then we had to make the choice to just jump in and be spontaneous and let go and experience it. And so it's moments like that that I want more of, that I want to work to have more of on whatever level of the scale it is. Because the bottom line for our whole series has been that our satisfaction level in life will rise or fall based on the health of our relationships. And when I think about so many relationships that I see, whether it's people around me or just in culture in general, it could be marriages, friendships, relationships with coworkers, with bosses, or even in the political spectrum, you look and you see, and it seems like it's really hard for all of us to get along. And yes, we need to do the hard work to build our relationships. We need to have introspection. We need to learn how to have difficult conversations. We need to learn to listen. But something that I think is really overlooked and undervalued a lot of times is the role that joyful celebration can play in our health, in the health of our relationships, in the health of our relationships with God. Because our heart's readiness to celebrate is a great litmus test for how healthy we may or may not be. You see, when we celebrate together, ego and worry fades away. There is no hierarchy anymore. Differences don't matter as much. And we are free to really connect with each other. So let me ask you a couple questions. When is the last time that you laughed so hard that you cried? Or that you just were able to fully let go and dance like crazy? or that you've almost lost your voice because you were cheering or singing so loudly, or that you were sitting around a table for hours and hours with amazing food, just talking and sharing stories with people that you care about. When's the last time you felt so full in a moment of joy and connection with other people? You see, having hearts that are ready to celebrate is really important to God. In fact, in Scripture, it's not a suggestion, it's a mandate. All throughout Scripture, we see specifically planned festivals. We see spontaneous parties. We see joyful dancing and singing. We see instructions on how to cultivate joy in our hearts and in our minds. This is a discipline that we have to develop. A lot of times I think we just wait for those moments to come to us, and they're great when they do, but this is something that we can work on, that we can do on purpose. It's a discipline that we need to develop. So today we're going to look at one of the more famous parables that are in the Bible. A parable is a story that's told to illustrate a greater truth, to teach us about something that it's going to be hard for us to understand. And so Jesus tells this parable. It's often called the story of the Prodigal Son. And he uses this to teach us about God. So you're going to hear about a father in the story, and that father is God. Okay, so we're going to be in Luke chapter 15, starting at verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property and with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him?' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours.' But we had to celebrate, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And that's where Jesus leaves it. He doesn't tell us what happens. He doesn't tell us what the older brother decides to do. And his audience knew that he was challenging them to see where their hearts were in this. And so as we read through it, through the lens of celebration especially, we need to do a little bit of digging to see how our hearts are inclined. Are they inclined to celebrate? Are they party ready? And there are two questions this morning that I want us to work through that can help determine how party ready our hearts are. The first question is, are your party pants on? Mine are. So what I mean by this is, are you searching for good? Are you looking for things to celebrate? You see, we're all really aware of how negative our world and our culture has become. You've heard John talk a lot about how our brains work and how it's so important to filter the thoughts that come in because that becomes how we view life. For example, there's the 24-hour news cycle, and it's great that we have access to information whenever we want it, but hasn't it made us more stressed out and anxious and negative? It's our inclination to look at the suffering, to look at the bad. Suffering even remains the almost exclusive focus of professional psychology. For example, in the last 30 years, journals have published almost 45,000 articles on depression and only 400 on joy. And I think that a lot of us, though, can become content with the negative. We're surrounded by it. We're comfortable with it. And because of that, it seeps into how we think, it seeps into who we are, it seeps into our relationships. And we don't spend enough time focusing and searching out the good. So when I say, are you looking for good? Are you searching for joy? What I don't mean is, are you turning off the TV and getting off Twitter and stop saying all negative things that come into your mind? You might have to do those things, but I mean, are you searching for it? Are you looking for it? In Philippians 4:8, Paul writes a letter to the Philippian church, and he says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." So what he's not telling us here is he's not saying, try really hard to not think about the negative or bad things. We have to actively go out and look for the good. We have to actively think about the good and bring it to light. So my disclaimer here, though, this morning, because I don't want anyone here to mishear what I'm saying. There are horrible things that happen in this world and that we will all experience in life. There are things that are traumatic, that are tragic, that are evil, that are bad. And so what I'm not saying is that we need to just put on a happy face and skip by like none of that exists. There's absolutely a time to grieve. There's a time to lament. But I do think we can stay in those places sometimes for too long and not remember that God has given us this gift of joyful celebration to pull us out. We just don't spend enough time searching for the good. And so there are some reasons why I think it's hard for us to see the good. And one of them is that we are so indeed focused on the negative that we have tunnel vision and can't see anything else. So we have to intentionally change the way that we are thinking about things and processing experiences. So a tool to do that is to be able to reframe a story. Now, the father in the story is who we can look at here. He had every right and every reason to be humiliated, to be angry, to be disappointed, to be brokenhearted. But he was able to change the story. Because when he saw his son on the horizon, he didn't say, well, there's that loser son that took a big chunk of our family's wealth, said that he didn't care about me at all. He would have been fine if I were dead, because then he could have just had all the stuff. And now he wants to come back in after he's lost everything. He is dead to me and not welcome here. No one probably would have blamed him for doing that, culturally speaking. But he reframed the story so that when he sees his son, he lifts up his robes and starts running. And this is not something that a patriarch of a family would have done. It was very undignified for him to do that, for him to go to someone even. So he starts running, and his first reaction is to celebrate because his son was dead and is alive, and he has him back. And so that's how he reframed the story. There's another person that I really admire that is so amazing at reframing stories, and that's Mr. Rogers. His mom used to say to him, he says that when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. So she was training him to not ignore that there was bad, but she was training him to look for people that are helping, to look for people that are doing good, and to bring those things to light. Somebody that is doing that really well now is this guy named Brandon Harvey. And he's someone that I just kind of happened upon in a podcast I was listening to, and I started following along with what he was doing. He got really overwhelmed at all of the cynicism and the negativity that he kept just being bombarded with when you just listen to the news and listen to people's conversations, complaining, like all of those things. He was overwhelmed by it, and so he was inspired by this quote, and he was like, there have to be people that are helping. There have to be good things that are happening in this world. And so I'm going to set out and I'm going to find them, and I'm going to bring them to light. So he started something called the Good Newspaper. And this is a newspaper that actually gets delivered to your door. They're also on Instagram and all of those things. But it just highlights the good things that are happening in this world and the people that are doing them. And it brings such hope and joy. And so every day I see in my feed, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have good news that I can share with people. And it changes the way you frame things. Another thing that keeps us from seeing the good is that we are too busy to bother. We all know this. We're too busy. I see this in my own life when it comes to celebrating. The way that I am wired is I really do like to celebrate. And I like to create moments to remember. I like to throw parties. But when I am too busy, when I am stressed, when I am overwhelmed, this is the first thing to go, besides dinner. But it's the first thing to go because I don't make time for it. And then I feel disconnected a little bit from who I am. And so I have to decide when I sense that, I'm like, oh, no, I need to get back on track. I need to make time for this. I need to find things to celebrate and look for the joy, because that's when I feel alive, and that's when I feel like who God made me to be. And so a couple quick things of how we can get better at this is, the first thing is we have to make a plan. We have to set aside time, and we have to plan for it. Just like anything that you would want to be disciplined in or become better at or grow in, it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some planning. The other thing is we can't just wait for other people to make this happen. We can't just be passive in this. We have to be initiators. So be the one to throw the party. Be the one to celebrate. Be the one to share good news with people. Be an initiator in that. And if you don't know where to start, here's a great idea on where to start. Cheer for strangers. This is something that I didn't know the impact that it would have on my heart this year, but it's just one of those moments that just sticks out for me. This past year, we had a friend running in the Richmond Marathon, so a group of us went to cheer her on. I had never done that before. And we're standing there on the side of the road, like waiting for her, but in the meantime, there are all these people running by that I don't know. And so I got really caught up in the moment. I'm like, yes, you can do it. And like, just so excited to be a part of this huge thing that these people were accomplishing and getting to cheer them on and encourage them. It was like I was a part of it, like as if I ran the marathon. And so it felt so good. So if you can, get out and cheer for strangers. Mark a time on your calendar, look for a race, find some strangers that are doing something cool, and go cheer them on at it. It really makes a difference. The other thing that can keep us from experiencing and looking for the good is that we've got our guard up. We have talked a lot in this series about fear, about guilt, about shame, about vulnerability. And really, the most vulnerable of all of the emotions is joy. Because if you think about it, to experience real joy, we have to be open-handed. We have to let go. We have to be fully in that moment. If we have something worth celebrating, that also means that we have something to lose. And we do this, we play this trick with ourselves all the time. So maybe you are looking for a house and you go up to somebody and you're like, we just put a contract on a house, but we'll wait and see what the inspector says. You know, we do this. We have to give a disclaimer to any moment of joy that we might want to feel. And it's because we're trying to protect ourselves. It's because we don't want to be brokenhearted, because we don't want to be disappointed. But we have to work on ways to let our guard down so that we can fully experience it. As a staff, we really value having a healthy culture and healthy relationships, and vulnerability is a huge part of that. And so we've tried to create ways for us to be able to grow in our vulnerability with each other. And one of the ways that we do that is we have staffirmations. So when it's somebody's birthday, we celebrate them during a staff meeting, and we sit around the table, and we all go around and share something that we love and appreciate about that person. And what happens is the person receiving these things has to really let their guard down and be vulnerable, because sometimes it's hard to receive things, even if they're wonderful. But then the people going around the table sharing, we have to let our guard down, because we have to practice saying real words to real people. We have to tell people to their faces while they're looking at us what we think of them. But then what's so cool to see happen is how much all of our love for each of those people grows, because we're seeing different perspectives of what everyone loves about that person. And it's stuff that we didn't see because we have different interactions with them, but we have a whole bigger picture of this person that we care about, and we get so connected to each other. So when we make it a priority to search for the good, when we become initiators, when we let our guard down so we can really experience the good, we become so connected to those people around us, and our relationships grow stronger. But I do know that it's also not always easy to celebrate other people. And so our second question that I want to ask you today is, every party has a pooper. Is it you? So translated, how are you at celebrating other people? In verse 28 in our story, it says, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him? This is the part of the story where it goes sideways a little bit. Because this older brother, when he is invited in to celebrate and given an invitation, he refused. And his refusal to celebrate is an indicator of how truly broken his relationships were. He had a really broken relationship with his brother and with his dad. And you see that with his brother. His first reaction to his brother coming home, being safe, is anger and bitterness. He's not relieved. He's not happy. He's mad about it. He won't even associate himself with that brother. He says, "This son of yours." Then it shows his broken relationship with his father. He wouldn't even give him the respect of going in to talk to him. He forced his father to come out to him. He wasn't excited that his dad didn't have to have a broken heart anymore. He was just focused on himself. And so there are some things in our lives that I do think we have in common with this older brother and that keep us from joining in. So those are that we're self-focused, we're stuck in comparison, and we can be greedy. You know, that brother, he was so focused on his version of the story, on his perspective, on what he was experiencing. He had been slaving away. He had never gotten a gift of an animal to throw a party with his friends. He couldn't see anyone else's perspective because he was so caught up in what was going on with himself. He was comparing himself to his brother instantly. That's the first thing he wanted to do. I've done all of these things right. He's done all of these things wrong. Therefore, I am better. And therefore, he deserves none of this. He was greedy. Back then, when a patriarch of a family would die, 2/3 of the estate and all the wealth would go to the older brother. 1/3 would go to the younger brother. So when his brother left, he took that entire third with him. It was gone. So by the brother coming back home, it was going to cost them. The father really meant it. So what he was walking into, like everything else, would have eventually belonged to that older brother. And the dad didn't skimp out on this party. He threw a giant bash. This is a party that the whole town would have come to. They only saved the fattened calf for those moments that were the most special. And so the older brother is seeing this, and he's like, oh, this is really going to cost me. And I think part of the reason that we don't celebrate other people is because we feel like there won't be enough to go around of whatever it is that we're looking for. It could be money, but it could be attention or praise. We're nervous that we won't get enough. But the crazy part is that for all of these things, the antidote is to celebrate anyway. The way that we train our hearts to get away from the self-focus, the greed, and the comparison is to celebrate anyway. We have to celebrate other people until we mean it. And we can throw little parties in our hearts. We can do this all the time. We can celebrate and look for all the good things that are happening in people. And when we decide we're going to throw little parties for people in our own hearts, then we become invested in the thriving of others. If you keep celebrating, eventually you'll mean it. Because can you imagine what this story would have looked like if the older brother followed the lead of the father? What if he heard the singing and started running in and then saw his brother and was like, what? And ran in and gave him a huge hug and was like, forget all that, man, I'm so glad that you're back. And then he saw his dad and he was like, I am so thankful that you don't have to have a broken heart anymore. We are all back together. Imagine the freedom and the joy of that reunion if he had let go of those other things. You see, we learn a lot about the state of the younger and the older brother's hearts in this story. But when we really look at the party, we learn about the Father's heart. And of course, Jesus is trying to teach us about our Father, God, who made us. He is the ultimate thrower of parties. He rejoices over us. It even says earlier in that chapter that a party happens in heaven every time someone comes back to God. He is so generous with the way that he loves us. He comes to us to invite us in so that we can experience fully everything that he has for us. But the key is that we have to remember him. We have to remember who he is. We have all been like one of these two sons at some point or another. We've forgotten who the Father is. The younger son did it through rebellion. He was like, I'm going to do it my way. I don't need you. I'm going to make my own path. But his story changes when he comes to his senses and remembers who his father is. He comes home and is celebrated. Then the older brother, the father says to him, I've been with you this whole time. Everything I have is yours. He's been in close proximity the whole time, but he's been so focused on doing the right things and checking his list off that he missed out on the thankful celebration that can only be experienced through a relationship with him. You see, when we remember who God is, gratitude and trust are the result. Then we get to live with carefree and joyful hearts that are ready to celebrate. So Laura, you can come back up. If you're a Christian in here, we should be the best at this. And I don't know that we always are. So some questions that'll be good to be floating around in your head is my life marked by joyful celebration? Am I someone who has good news to share? Am I somebody that other people want to share good news with? Am I searching for good? Am I quick to celebrate other people? Because I think that if we pay attention to this, if we pay attention to cultivating a heart of joyful celebration as individuals and as a community, then we are going to see so much less stress and worry and negativity and depression and just unhealth in our relationships. And people that don't know Jesus are going to be drawn in and have to be a part of that and want to know what makes it so different. So in this series, we have tried each week to be really practical and then to give you space at the end of each message to think through some things that maybe God is tugging on your heart a little bit or you've been challenged by. And so we have something called 2 minutes to think. And so that's where we set the clock for 2 minutes, and you guys are just going to sit. And if you have something to write with or you want to write notes on your phone, you can pull that out. But we're going to list 3 questions. You don't have to answer them all. You can pick one to focus on, but just take that 2 minutes to focus and say, what is my action step that I can take? What do I need to do to cultivate this in my life? And then after that, we're going to celebrate together. We're going to take communion today. John's going to come up and give instructions on what that's going to look like. But this is a moment where we get to stop and we get to remember who God is and what Jesus has done. And we get to do that together. And then the band is going to lead us in such a fun song. And so we're going to sing together and move around together. And so the challenge is to just let loose and have fun while we're singing and celebrating together. So we're going to put the questions up there. The first question is, what is one thing I can do to focus on good news on a regular basis? And then who is someone I should have celebrated but didn't? And what can I do now? And what is an area where I have kept my guard up and not allowed myself to fully experience joy?